It is episode 27 of the CelticsBlog podcast, the official podcast of CelticsBlog.com, where we have a boatload of content from Paul Pierce weekend. It was only right that as the Celtics gave Pierce the ceremony of a lifetime for his contributions over nearly 20 years with the Celtics, that the Celtics blog had to do our due diligence as well over there. A number of articles, a letter from Andrew Doxey, and many more Paul Pierce memories available at Celtics blog, as well as CLNS media from the day that was. Sunday was unbelievable beside the game. And today on the Celtics blog podcast, we have two people who were in the building that night and two people who followed Paul Pierce his whole career covering the Celtics. We have from the Metrowest Daily, Scott Souza, to lead off the show with memories of Pierce's career, the growth, and the greatness that he displayed in green. And then Mike Petraglia gives us a sensational synopsis of the atmosphere that was in the Garden, because frankly, you weren't getting in the Garden on Sunday. Those tickets were expensive, and it was packed, rightfully so, for a game that big, for a ceremony that big. And now 34 hangs in the rafters. So now that Pierce has been immortalized in the Garden, let's immortalize him on the Celtics blog podcast. With us first to lead this off is Scott Souza.
Bad pass and a turnover. Pierce comes up with it. Pierce down the lane. Blocking foul. Counted and one. A 16-0 run. And the lead is cut to 10. I don't believe what I'm seeing right now. For the whole game, the Celtics have really struggled to put the ball in the basket. Paul Pierce avoids the charge, the little flip, and one opportunity. The Knicks were up by 26 with 9:22 remaining. The Celtics have scored 17 straight points in about 2.5 minutes.
Well, I remember him when he was at Kansas. I didn't pay ultra close attention, but I obviously knew he was a great player. And then I remember when he came to the Boston Celtics, and it was obvious, right from the very beginning, that those were some rough Celtics years when Paul first came to the Celtics. The Rick Pitino era. They thought they were building something with Antoine Walker, and then they got a couple of they got obviously the draft choices. They had Chauncey Billups, they had Ron Mercer, but things, they were coming off of the era right before that, in which they were tanking and the ML Carr team. So there weren't a lot of Celtics fans in kind of the mid-'90s. So it was really Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker that kind of ramped back up. And the first time that I really remember him, really thinking that he had a chance to be the type of player that he was when they made it back to the playoffs that first time under Jim O'Brien. And a lot of people still weren't paying attention to them that much back then, I don't think. But that first series against Philadelphia, against Allen Iverson, they hadn't been back to the playoffs in years. They wound up going to a Game 5. I think Paul Pierce had 48 points in that Game 5. That was the game after which I was actually talking to Antoine Walker about this a little bit on Saturday at the reception beforehand, when Antoine Walker kind of proclaimed that the Celtics had two stars and Paul was the 1A star and he was the 1B star. And that was the first time that Antoine had kind of given that ground, because he had, I think, fashioned himself as the Celtic star to that point. And I asked him about that on Saturday, and he said I had to realize what it was. And Paul Pierce was a better scorer than me already at that point in time, and was going to be a better scorer than me. And I had to embrace that, and kind of history wrote from there in terms of getting to the NBA Finals that year. The conference finals that year, I should say, the big comeback against the New Jersey Nets. I believe it was the next year when he hit the shot over Al Harrington, and when they upset the Pacers in that first-round series, pretty much got Isaiah Thomas fired as Pacers coach there. And then, obviously, there was another lull, and then they came back for the championship. But I would really say I remember Paul Pierce from his early days with the Celtics, but really I thought that 2002 Eastern Conference finalist team was his real coming out party.
What can you say about that Antoine Walker-Paul Pierce dynamic for a young kid like me? I feel like people my age don't really remember that because of how big Pierce's image blew up in that big 3 years. That could have been something, I feel like, the Walker-Pierce thing. And why don't you think that ever did become something?
It's interesting. Danny Ainge, actually, the year after they got to the Eastern Conference Finals, where Jim O'Brien was the coach, and Rick Pitino had kind of built that up, and then he had gotten impatient. He had traded Chauncey Billups. Ron Marshall didn't work out. But that team had Kenny Anderson and Walker. They had a lot of role players around it. It was Walter McCarty. It was Eric Williams. I'm trying to remember some of the other guys on that team. Yuri Welch was later. I think Vitaly Potapico might have been on that team. A lot of names that don't come to mind right now. They also made the trade that year for Tony Delk and Rodney Rogers to bring those two guys in. So it was kind of a go as far as you can, as quickly as you can team, kind of play for the now moment. And when Danny Ainge came in, he looked at that team over the next year and decided, he was actually hired. A lot of people forget this. He was actually hired during the Eastern Conference Finals. So they're down 2-0 to New Jersey the next year, or the playoff series. It was either the finals it wasn't the finals the next year. It was the semifinals the next year when they had beaten Indiana down 2-0. And then, Whit Grosek has a press conference to announce that they're hiring Danny Ainge to take over the basketball operations from, at that point, Chris Wallace. And I think Danny Ainge looked at that team and kind of did similar to what he did with I would put that team in the same category a little bit of the Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder team of last year, where Danny Ainge looked at it, says, I like these guys, but the ceiling is only so high on these guys, and if we're ever going to get to that next level, we got to move some pieces around. And I think he saw Paul Pierce as a cornerstone, but obviously he didn't see Antoine Walker quite the same way, and they made some trades, and one of which included Antoine Walker being traded in the late Rafe LaFrentz trade. And then they brought in Doc Rivers. They kind of reassembled a little bit of that team together the year that they won the Atlantic Division championship. They brought Antoine Walker back to that team for a playoff push because I think the owners wanted to be in the playoffs. They had Gary Payton on that team, some other names on that team. And when that didn't work out, I think Danny Ainge started again to look long-term and looked more at the potential down the road of either building around Paul Pierce and a very high draft pick if the Celtics weren't very good, or hopefully in vain of what actually happened, which was, trading to put a couple of superstars around Paul Pierce, and eventually he was able to do that with Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen.
September 25th, 2000. Pierce and two friends arrived at a Boston nightclub. Minutes later, Pierce was fighting for his life.
It just happened so fast, and I looked up, and my clothes were ripped. I had blood coming down my face. That's the first thing I remember, blood coming down my face, and I'm like wiping it, and I'm like, I'm seriously hurt.
What role do you think that stabbing incident that he had within the first year or two of his career had on his career?
Well, I think Paul Pierce did a lot of maturing over his career. I was kind of surprised, actually, that he brought up the stabbing incident when we were talking to him Saturday night. I don't think he mentioned it Sunday anywhere, but Saturday night when they had the reception, very close to where that incident took place, actually, right in the theater district in Boston. He brought it up, and he said he wasn't sure. He had come from a bad neighborhood, a gang neighborhood in Los Angeles, and here he comes all over to Boston. He gets stabbed. He almost died. And that's well-versed, that night that he was with Tony Batiste. And he was talking about, well, at that point you start to think about what is your future in Boston, and is this a dangerous city for him, not only because he got stabbed in the nightclub, but because that was kind of an unsolved crime. I mean, they could have, Paul Pierce never really talked after that, and the people involved in that there could have been retribution if there was a fear that he was going to talk. So there was a lot of that hanging around back then. And I think it was actually more, I think he remained kind of the same guy through that, I think. Obviously, you appreciate life more, and I'm sure he appreciated his family, and I think it was his girlfriend at the time who eventually became his wife. I don't know exactly how that worked out, but I know he talks about having more appreciation for his family and his mom kind of through that situation. I think it was actually later on in his career when he kind of took that turn. If you remember the Indiana Pacers series, the one I was talking about, in which He got thrown out of the game. He took off the jersey, was twirling the jersey around, wound up coming to the post-game press conference with the wrap around his head, pretending that he got a major injury from the elbow that he took from the foul that he took from, I think it was Lee Tinsley, I want to say, was the player on the other end of that, and Paul Pierce wound up elbowing him. The Celtics actually won that game. Antoine Walker won that game in overtime. But in terms of, he had a tarnished image coming out of that playoff. They wound up getting blown out in Game 7 of that series, and things weren't really trending well. There was talk that Danny Ainge was willing to trade Paul Pierce at that point in time. I believe the trade, I may be a little off on this, but I believe the trade that was talked about at that point in time was Danny Ainge was trying to trade Paul for a top pick to be able to draft Chris Paul. And then that didn't work out in the end, and Ainge stayed, and they decided that he was the guy that they were going to continue to build around. And it was really the relationship with him and Doc Rivers that I think went a long way towards that maturation process with him. I think if you look at it now, we would say that, from an X and O's point of view, Brad Stevens is probably a better strict coach than Doc Rivers. But Doc Rivers had a way of connecting with players and veteran players, and he connected with Paul Pierce. And, Doc Rivers yesterday was talking about, how he got on him, and, he wound up benching him for that game in the fourth quarter. They wound up losing the game. And about how impressed he was when Paul Pierce came into his office a couple of days later. And I think I'd heard a version of this story in the past, but never the full version that Doc told yesterday, that Paul came to him in his office and said, I'm ready now. I'm ready to buy in. I'm ready to learn what it takes. I'm ready to have a role as opposed to just, that was the NBA where just everybody wanted to be a star. Everybody wanted to shoot a lot. Everyone wanted to dress the way that they wanted to dress. And I think it was around then that Pierce decided that if he was going to be able to do the things in the Celtics uniform that he wanted to do in terms of win a championship, in terms of having his number perhaps eventually raised to the rafters, that would have been considered laughable back in 2005, even with the stats he was putting up. He had to change some ways, and he said, when he was talking to, kind of addressed a lot of the people who were there to see him during the ceremony. You probably saw this yesterday when he was talking to Doc Rivers. The line that stood out to me and was kind of, there were a lot of poignant moments where the kind of the pause moments or, the tear moments, I guess. And one of them was, I realized you didn't want me to do it your way. You wanted me to do it the right way. And I appreciated that you kept on me and kept enforcing me to do that. And, that was a big part of it. That said, by the end of 2007, he had gotten pretty tired of that situation. He had been through the Ricky Davis team, and they looked like they were on the upswing, and then they had some young guys, and they really fell apart the next year when Paul had the stress reaction and in his foot, and he was out for that 18-game losing streak. And Tony Allen was out for that too, and they went on that huge losing streak. And by the end of that season, I think Paul had really kind of had enough and pretty much gave an ultimatum to Danny Ainge and the ownership. Listen, either you guys put some talent around me, and he wasn't talking about Yi Jiangyang, who was the odds-on favorite for the Celtics draft pick when they didn't get one or two that year. I remember in the 2007 season, there was a lot of talk about, because the Celtics were going to get a top 3, 4, 5 pick, and who were they going to get? And, there was a lot of excitement about the lottery, because when you're a bad team, that's the only thing you have excited about is the lottery. And Pierce wanted no part of those conversations. You could not ask him about the lottery. He wasn't interested in it. He wouldn't participate in like the lottery party that they had to find out that in fact they got the number 5 pick. And if you remember, the kind of the face of that was Delonte West kind of be like, oh no, we didn't get the pick. Paul Pierce didn't want anything to do with that. And it would have been interesting, I think, to see what would have happened if they had gotten 1 or 2 and they drafted Kevin Durant, whether Paul Pierce would have been in for that type of situation, whether he would have seen that Durant was such a talent that he wanted to stick with it, or whether he would have said, okay, you're going with a full youth movement. It's time for you to move on from me. Much the same way that Minnesota was preparing to move on from Kevin Garnett, and Seattle at the time was preparing to move on for Ray Allen. And obviously, everything changed for Pierce when they made those 2 trades over the summer. It showed him that there was a commitment to winning in the franchise, and he, from that point on, was pretty much willing to do whatever it took on the court to make that whole situation work. It was no longer about him. It was about winning that championship.
And there did seem to be a discernible effort by the team that year to save Pierce and save his status in Boston, because at that point, even though the championship hadn't been won yet, Pierce was really Pierce at that point. Like he had a special status around the team and the city. What moment do you think turned Pierce from being a great young player to being Paul Pierce that we think of today?
That's an interesting one, because I would say, because I think it kind of happened during the duration of the time where they actually didn't win as much. I think he was already a mature player when they lost that 2005 series, when they lost that series to the Indiana Pacers, when they brought it back Antoine Walker. I think by then he was already, being seen as one of the better players in the NBA. He kind of had that disastrous Team USA situation. But I think by then it was kind of weird. It was actually during those downtimes afterwards that, people around here really latched onto him, and people who were interested in, and probably your generation of people who were really interested in that young Celtics team, the Al Jefferson, Gerald Green, Kendrick Perkins, Ryan Gomes, that Rajon Rondo, that up-and-coming team. I think those people, by that point, people were kind of coming up on them. They didn't remember a Celtics team without Paul Pierce. So they had Paul Pierce their entire career. And I think they had begun to build him up. And then, of course, he was already an all-star. He was already a star. He was a MVP top 10 guy the year that he played with Ricky Davis when they won 36 games. So he was already a star in the league by that point. And he was a star around here in terms of the basketball fans that existed, really wrapped their arms around Paul Pierce. And I think for a lot of it was the basketball fans around here had a relationship with Paul Pierce as a player a lot more than the general sports fan. I think in the general sports fan, you would say 2007, 2008 was when he finally, got over that hump. But I think the basketball fan, the Celtics fan in the area, had a much tighter relationship with Paul Pierce before that, because he was their only star player at the time. You weren't shuffling out stars. It wasn't like this generation where one year it's Isaiah Thomas and the next year it's Kyrie Irving, and then you bring in Al Horford and you sign Gordon Hayward. For a while, it was really only Paul Pierce, and then the two segments that Antoine Walker was here, he would have been the other guy in that scenario. That's why I think that so many people felt such a connection to him when it came to yesterday's ceremony. That you got to remember, people who are under, say, the age of 35 don't really, they've heard of Larry Bird. They may have seen them play when they were very young, but they didn't, live and die with the 84 and the 86 and the 81 Celtics. They don't really remember those teams. And if you're in your early 30s, you don't remember those teams at all. So Paul Pierce has been the Celtics for a great part of the lives of basketball fans here who are, up to 30 years old.
Certainly not the sight the Celtics and their fans want to see. Paul Pierce in a lot of pain, had to be carried off. Then they put him in the wheelchair as he's going back to the locker room. Obviously in a lot of pain, can't walk off on his own power. This is the sight that the Celtics fans want to see. And hear the ovation as he comes hopping out of the tunnel. Rondo to Pierce. Pierce for three. Bang! Celtics back up by one. Outstanding read by Rondo there to reject it. Rondo back to Pierce. Another three. Puts it in. Back-to-back three-pointers for Paul Pierce.
There was a special connection you could feel in the stadium Sunday. That devotion to Pierce and among the fan base is strong. There does seem to be a gap, though, when it comes to Celtics fans' perception of Pierce and then other fans' perception of Pierce league-wide. Especially Sunday, you saw it. A lot of people tweeting, trying to clown Pierce and stuff like that. There does seem to be a gap between the Celtics vision of Paul Pierce and then the league-wide vision of Paul Pierce. Why do you think that is? Is it the fact that he did only win one championship over that time and that we're so ring-oriented when we look at the league nowadays?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, actually. I wasn't privy to that as much because I wasn't following all the social media accounts. I know that, when it comes to players around the league, I think people view things in tiers, and you have the Michael Jordan tier, and then you have the Kobe Bryant tier, and you have the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird tier. And for a lot of people, things kind of, anybody who's not involved in that is not worthy of, some of the over-the-top accolades that would come with a post-game retirement ceremony. It's one thing to have your number retired, but there is a little bit of a difference between the halftime ceremony that like a Robert Parrish had or Cedric Maxwell had, or that Kevin Garnett will likely have.
Mm-hmm.
Difference between that and having that whole post-game 45-minute situation, and maybe some people thought they were over the top, but I don't think many Boston sports fans thought it was over the top, and I certainly don't think anybody who's there was saying, this is dragging on too long. Why are we making such a big deal of this? Everybody there was quite enthralled and had a great time. It was a great ceremony. I think one of the things I imagine most of the people who are listening/watching this are people who have watched the ceremony and maybe some of whom were even there. But one of the great parts of it, there were a lot of great parts of it. The shots of Paul and his family throughout the game were great. The fact that Kevin Garnett, Rajon Rondo, and Doc Rivers were there was great, and also Antoine Walker as well. But one of the things that really stood out to me was that 5-minute tribute video that you can find online. It's on Celtics.com. If you look at their Twitter account or just look on their website, I'm sure it's on that as well. That Sean Grandy wrote, that Tommy Heinsohn narrated, was just spectacular. It was so well edited, put together. It was well written, and it really spoke to somebody who didn't parachute in for the finals or didn't just buy the Pierce media narrative that came out of some of his lesser moments for the Celtics, or just something overly fluffy from what you remember him at the end of his career. It was really written from and shot from the perspective of the people who remember him coming out in Kansas as the number 10 pick, slipping in the draft, how upset he was because of that. Becoming an early star, kind of one of the things Walter McCarty said on Saturday was, we needed somebody to reignite the Celtics in the city, and he turned out to be the one. Really get the fan interest going again. And then, all the way through the championship and even some of the post-championship stuff, and even some of the post-Celtics stuff. He came back. The emotion that he stirred when he came back the first time with Brooklyn, and the Thank You Paul video that was shown, and then again when he came in with the Clippers that one final time, Isaiah Thomas doing him the solid by letting him take the free shot over him. Isaiah Thomas defensive jokes aside, but Isaiah Thomas kind of gave the token effort there. Paul Pierce was able to get a shot off over the 5'9" Isaiah Thomas.
That is fun. I remember that.
And then going. Yeah, then going and kissing the logo, the Leprechaun logo at center court, just really encapsulating that all together and doing it in quite a nice wordsmith way by kind of repeating some of the same words and saying that the spot on the banner was always his. It was just a matter of him being able to live up to it and finally achieve it. And obviously he did as a 10-time All-Star and as a champion.
So you seem to think Garnett will be up in the rafters as well. How long do you think it might be before that? Obviously an extra onus on Pierce getting up there quickly after retirement because of his almost career-long length with the Celtics. When could we see Garnett's 5 up there as well?
That's an interesting one. I wonder what the dynamics of that are in terms of I know this. I'm pretty sure the Celtics intend to do it. I mean, they've kept his number out of circulation for this long for a reason. They actually kept number 20 out of circulation for a long time. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if it weren't for the fact that Gordon Hayward was number 20 and they kind of relented on that. They intentionally. It's not an accident that nobody had 20 for that long a time. They went back to 9 after just 1 or 2 years with Rondo. So there was. I don't think there was ever much of a thought that they were going to do retire Rondo's number, but. They kept 5 out of circulation, so they obviously have an idea to do it. I wonder if they would want to wait for Minnesota to do something first, and I don't think Garnett's career really ended with Minnesota the way he hoped it was going to be. I think he thought he was going to go back and have a better landing there. I think he felt kind of isolated when he was there, that he was there as kind of the token Kevin Garnett as opposed to a guy who could actually contribute, a guy who was actually respected. I think he thought that he was almost a mascot by the end of time there, and he kind of retired, basically just didn't come to training camp and informed them that he was going to retire that way. It wasn't he never went back and signed as far as I know, signed the one-day contract and did all the things that Paul did and have the final press conference. It's interesting with Garnett, and this is kind of a side subject, but he seems to have more of a connection with Boston now when he comes back here than he did with Minnesota, even though he played with Minnesota for much longer. But I wonder if there's any type of give and take between the ownership groups in terms of it's only proper for Minnesota to do it first, or whether Boston will say within the next couple of years, I guess, listen, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it, because it'll be coming up on his Hall of Fame eligibility, and at the very least, I think it would happen right after he makes the Hall of Fame. But I think it could happen sooner.
That's a guest spot right there. Scott Souza, lots of good information in a short amount of time. I appreciate you taking time out of your night to be here with us tonight, Scott.
No problem at all. Thanks for doing the show. I'm sure people will enjoy it.
Alrighty, that is Scott Souza of the Metrowest Daily. You can follow him on Twitter and read his work over there as well. Thanks a lot to Scott Souza, and thanks a lot to SeatGeek as well. SeatGeek, I can't say enough about this app. It's on my phone, and it has been for years, because there are a number of ticket agencies out there that have apps, and it is a nightmare scrolling through all those pages, trying to navigate, figure out what deal is right, where you're sitting. It's almost impossible. And as great as SeatGeek is, I think the best thing about it is that it's so easy to use. You click on an event, you've got the map right up in front of you. There's these green dots that signify a great deal, and there's red dots that instantly turn you away from bad deals to an event. You can see row by row, seat by seat, where you're going to be sitting for these events. It's really has changed my ticket buying experience. I can say that 100%. So SeatGeek is the way to go if you're going to be buying tickets. It's convenient, it's effective, and the best part about it is that my listeners have a special deal today here on the Banners broadcast. Yes, if you listen to this show, you are going to get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the app, and when you order your tickets, enter the promo code Garden Report. There's still one more game before the All-Star break, Wednesday against the Clippers. Doc Rivers is back again. Big game before the Celtics are off for 9 days, so if you can't get enough of basketball before it's gone, go on SeatGeek, and you're going to get $20 off your tickets to Celtics Clippers. That's promo code Garden Report, one word, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Now, on to Mike Petraglia, our own at CelticsBlog and CLNS Media, who's going to take us inside the Garden. If you can't buy tickets online, if you can't be there, then CLNS Media is the place to go, and Mike Petraglia is a big part of that effort, getting everything you need to know from inside the Garden Sunday. Lucky man to be there. Let's talk to him now.
He was always a Celtic. That spot in the rafters, it was always his. But the road that brought him here, the road to become a legend, to become the truth, to become Paul Pierce, that's the good stuff. Because Celtics legends aren't born, they're made. Every number in the rafters has a story. Every unforgettable late night was born of an early morning of work, of sweat, and of hope. There were two Englewoods in the 1980s because outside the form, outside the mystical land of Magic and Kareem, showtime stopped and real life began. The life that derailed so many of those dreams, but not that smile. Not Paul Pierce. And when the blacktop became the wheat fields, the playground became the field house, the smile was still there.
So, how was the atmosphere? The Clippers game, it was about a year ago when he hit his final shot in Boston. I remember that Brooklyn game well when the Nets and then Garnett and Pierce came back for the first time. That was electric, as crazy as I've seen the Garden ever being there myself. Did the hype match the ticket price yesterday?
It did. It really did. I thought the anticipation of the event was something that was building for months and months and months. And when you got inside the building yesterday, Bobby, you could feel it like an NBA Finals game. It felt that electric inside. And as the warm-ups began, you could hear the crowd kind of buzzing and people talking to each other. Usually I gauge the excitement level of a particular game by the number of conversations you see on court pregame. There must have been 50 different conversations with players and coaches going on courtside. And of course, what added to it was, and from my perspective anyway, was Doc Rivers talking pregame about 45 minutes before tip-off, really telling us what the day meant to him, why he took the day off between playing in Philadelphia and playing in Brooklyn on Monday night, what it meant for him to be there. And he said, look, this is something we talked about before we won the 2008 championship. I wasn't going to miss this for the world. I wanted to be there, and I knew that given the way the NBA schedule came out, back last summer, I was going to be there.
It was something seeing him back in the press scrum. I think that more than anything from afar, watching on the CLNS Media YouTube page, you can too, it's up there now. Seeing Doc back in the scrum in front of the Celtics poster taking questions, like that just threw you right back to that age.
It did.
What was it like for you all these years after him leaving to see him back in that position again?
It was great because he was relaxed. He looked like he was back coaching the Boston Celtics, and I'm sure the way his up and down Clippers have played this year and the Blake Griffin drama, trading him away to the Pistons and getting widely criticized for it, I'm sure he kind of wishes he would be back in Boston. He was actually asked, do you regret leaving? And he says, no, I don't regret leaving because, there comes a time for everything to pass, and the time for me was past. But do I miss it? Absolutely. Do I cherish those days in Boston? Every single day. And he made that much very clear. He also made very much clear that he was going to enjoy the game courtside and watch a game for the first time in his NBA career.
With a beer.
With a beer and do it courtside with Rajon Rondo and Kevin Garnett. To see the three of them watch a game just as fans was, I thought, part of the spectacle of it all on Sunday. And to watch Paul Pierce watching them enjoy it on the video board and then to have the camera pan back to him, that was pretty special too. Just to see the byplay between the two sides, Pierce and his family, and then Doc, Rajon, and KG enjoying themselves, Antoine Walker as well. To see them all enjoying and savoring the atmosphere was nice, because in a situation like this, Bobby, too often we all get caught up in it. We don't savor the moment for what it is, and it's supposed to be a celebration. It's supposed to be fun, and you could see that they were definitely having fun. I love the fact that Pierce came over during one timeout and took a picture with KG, Rondo, and Doc, and KG put it up on his Twitter page. That was pretty cool.
It was very cool to see those guys all out there again. Doc saying, too, with the beer, I'm going to yell at the refs. I'm going to boo LeBron. Everyone was like, oh, you yell at the refs anyway every game. So when did they all come out onto the floor? I thought it was very cool that they were courtside. And at what point did they come out, and what was the crowd reaction like when they entered?
About 10 minutes before the game, Bobby, and the crowd, it was that rising crescendo. You could tell everybody paying attention and going, ooh, ah, and then the clapping, and then the applause, and then the ovation. It builds like that. That's what Paul said this, during a ceremony. That's what makes it so wonderful in Boston, is that the crowd is unlike any other in the NBA. And while that might be hyperbole to a lot of people around the NBA and a cause for a lot of eye roll, I think it's true. I come from the Midwest. I come from Cincinnati. And growing up, I saw a lot of different types of crowds for basketball, college basketball, the Reds, the Bengals. But when I came here and saw my first Celtics game and then covered the first Celtics game, it's different from start to finish. And Pierce saying during the ceremony, even when we were bad, really bad, the crowd was the loudest in the NBA. And that's kind of what I thought, yesterday was also a celebration of, and something Pierce really, I thought, did a great job of recognizing toward the end of his speech.
There was that LeBron dynamic, too. Noticeable chirping between Doc, Pierce, everyone on the sideline there, Garnett especially, too. The stare-downs from LeBron during the game. We all know what the result of the game was on Sunday, and LeBron let it be known with them. What was that dynamic like, them going back and forth? Just like old times. It's funny to see LeBron still out there all these years later.
Got to tell you, I think LeBron was inspired by that. And certainly the way he played, LeBron played at a different level. Certainly having a rejuvenated roster full of young, tall, stretch bigs and forwards really helps his cause. And the fact that Jordan Clarkson was hitting everything in sight from beyond the arc, it was the perfect storm on Sunday for LeBron because he was inspired. He inspired his teammates. And the irony is, you would think it would have inspired the Celtics, but after the first quarter, they looked totally out of gas. And, you wouldn't have expected that on a day like yesterday. I mean, the highlights for the Celtics had to be Kyrie going to the basket within the first 10 seconds for the layup, then Kyrie crossing over LeBron within the first 5 minutes of the game, and the crowd exploding before he even raised up the jump shot. And then it went in. And then I thought, to me, that was the apex of the game for the Celtics. From that point on, it was all Cavaliers.
It was all LeBron and the Cavaliers on Sunday, of course. Noticeably missing, as we have talked about for years, Ray Allen now. On the golf course, as Instagram later revealed during the game and ceremonies, I doubt anyone talked about it out down there, but what is this whole dynamic like at this point? Why is there so much separation? Why does it feel like we're years away from that ever being rekindled?
Because it's personal. And anytime some obvious slight occurs like that, or absence occurs where Ray Allen, part of the big three, was not there to celebrate one of the great Celtics of all time, and certainly Ray Allen had a vital, pivotal role in helping Paul Pierce win that NBA title in 08 and nearly doing it in 10. Obviously, KG did too, and Rondo did too, but Ray Allen served a huge role on that team. The only thing you can take away from the fact that he wasn't there, that he is not playing anymore, is the fact that he would have felt very, very uncomfortable with Rajon Rondo there and with KG there and the way it all ended. And he probably felt, look, I don't want to take away from Paul Pierce's day by having some unspoken tension between Rondo and KG. And, you criticize Ray all you want for him. He should have been the bigger man. He should have been there, let bygones be bygones. But if Ray was that uncomfortable, then it's probably just as well he stayed away.
As you said in the opener, there was a big onus on the Celtics organization to get this done quickly, less than a year after retirement. 34 hangs in the banners now. We all know the storylines between some of the great Celtics players ever and the role they played in the franchise's history. What would you say, and what do you think the team feels like is Pierce's role in Celtics history, and what is the most important attribute you think he contributed to the team in his time here?
Great scorer. One of the most, it was Robert Parrish saying yesterday, this stunned me a little bit. Who's the better scorer, Paul Pierce or Larry Bird? He'd take Paul Pierce, just as a pure scorer, not as an overall player, not as a passer, and not certainly as a rebounder or whatnot, even though Pierce was a terrific rebounder in his day. And but the thing about Paul Pierce and his legacy is how understated his intelligence factor was. And I thought Doc did a good job of bringing that up yesterday on Sunday, saying, look, Paul Pierce was a lot of things, but the thing he doesn't get credit for is how smart a player he was. He may have been the smartest player I ever coached. That's saying a lot. And, I don't think Doc is very far off in that estimation. And, it was Doc bringing up that play and others as well. Paul Pierce bringing up the play, the jump ball late in Game 7 of the 2008 Eastern Conference semifinals against the Cavaliers. and Paul Pierce realizing the Celtics weren't going to win the tip. So he went to the Cavaliers side, stole the ball, won the ball, won the tip, and the Celtics went on to win that game in dramatic fashion, holding off the Cavaliers. That singular play, instinctive play on the jump ball late in Game 7 of the 08 Finals is probably, the one play that people point to, the people that know and played with Paul point to as a play that really sums up Paul's career.
I do like that Doc brought that up, and he was really happy to let you know that he was going outside the box with that one. But it was, I didn't remember that one, and he brought it up, and it was very interesting to hear that story as well. There was a lot of talk about Pierce, his number going up there. There's still one spot left on that banner. Do you think the next one that's going to go up there is Kevin Garnett at some point?
It's either Kevin Garnett or Rajon Rondo, and I think it's going to be KG, just because he overnight changed the culture of the Celtics and brought the intensity back that not even Paul Pierce on his own could bring to the fore. And I think Kevin Garnett is the most beloved Celtic for as short a period of time as he was here as there has ever been, and he won a title. And I think when you consider what KG meant to the culture of that Celtic era, I think he's going to probably wind up. First of all, he's a Hall of Fame player, and he made his Hall of Fame. He cemented his Hall of Fame credentials in Boston. When you throw all of that together in the mix, I think that more than equates to a place up in the rafters, and it would give the Celtics another chance to celebrate what was a great time in Celtics glory. That 2007-08 season through 2011 and 12.
Everyone's got their story from Game 6 in 2008, what that night was like for them to be in the building that night. Were you there that night? I
was.
What was it like back then?
I'm going to tell you, Bobby, it was a little anticlimactic just because the Lakers went so cold and the Celtics got so hot in the second quarter, and the Lakers never responded after halftime. I was expecting the Lakers to come out and make one final charge, maybe Kobe doing to the Celtics what Paul Pierce did to the Lakers in Game 4. I was kind of expecting that. Never materialized. And to see the Celtics literally run the Lakers off the court, it was a little, anticlimactic. I would have liked to have seen a more dramatic, I'm sure a lot of Celtics fans were, hey, it's, I'm going to enjoy this. We're all going to savor this Game 6, finally beating Kobe and the Lakers, and we're putting the stake in our arch rival. We love it. But from a basketball purist point of view, from a journalist point of view, I was thinking, Game 6, Game 7 of the 84 finals and the 85 finals, but the 84 finals, I was hoping for some type of ending like that, but it didn't materialize, and it was a coronation, to answer your question, Bobby. The second half of that Game 6 in 08 against the Lakers was a simple coronation of clearly the best team in the NBA that year.
Still can't get over the fact that I asked you the other day, did you cover the Big Three? And you were like, yeah, the tail end in 93. And I'm like, not that one.
Yeah, but you say Big Three to me, I still think of that iconic picture of the three players, Bird, McHale, and Parrish, standing midcourt at the old Garden. To me, that will forever be the Big Three. And no disrespect to Paul, KG, and Ray. That image of those three Celtics players will forever be burned in my memory.
That's Mike Petraglia, who was in the house on Sunday and in the house for the old Big Three, who now all sit together in their banners. You can follow the Banners broadcast every week on iTunes, Stitcher. Get it there when it drops. And I'm sure you'll hear plenty of Trags as we go into the second half of this season. All-Star break starts Wednesday after the Clippers game. Celtics need it badly. 9 days off coming for this team after the big loss to the Cavs on Sunday. Thanks for being here, Mike.
Appreciate it. May I say one more thing, Bobby?
Yes, absolutely.
That is one dope hat. Love it.
Bleep you. This is our way.
Yes, loud.
Stevens is pretty smart and knows what he's doing.
The 3-and-D roll. Go, it's a D-League.
If I had Antoine Walker's body, I'd be an all-star.
Reunion Arena in Dallas, where the Mavs and Lakers are playing tonight, was built in 1980. Now, you couldn't ask for a better facility. It's easily accessible, has all the comforts of a theater, and there isn't a bad seat in the house. But for some reason, there are those who prefer the Boston Garden, mostly those who wear Celtic green.
What is so special about the Boston Garden other than the fact that it's 1,000 years old? Let's take a look. First of all, a garden it's not. It's a train station, really. One flight up and you're on the fabled parquet floor. Now, before you get all misty-eyed about the parquet, take a closer look.